Oops, somebody. That's okay. I am not Heather Joy James, although she is just a few weeks shy of returning. It has been, I can't believe that it's the last few weeks of my filling in for her maternity leave, but it's been a wonderful year. At any rate, I'm Stevan, not Heather. Our sermon this morning is entitled Clandestine Ways, however. I don't know when you remember sort of having a less complicated, a less mysterious, a less ambiguous relationship with night. Do you remember that moment in your life when night stopped being something that you were potentially afraid of, like being afraid of the dark, and night became something you were a little bit more comfortable with? Do you remember that time? Can you recall at what point in your life night went from being something that you avoided? Oh no, it's bedtime, I have to be by myself in my room, I'm away from my mom or my dad, I have to be, in my covers with the covers up to my neck and looking around, what's that sound, what's that shadow? Do you remember when night became something that you embraced and thought, oh, I finally get to unwind. Nobody has to see me, I can put on my comfy clothes and just be by myself. The bottom line is, darkness and night has not always been something that we're all that comfortable with in life. And I think even into adulthood, we remain somewhat connected to that, the nature of dark and the nature of night that allows for a certain level of secrecy, if you will, a certain level of mystery, a certain level of being able to do things that are not out and in the open to be scrutinized and judged by everybody during the day. In this Lenten season, then, I wondered why the Nicodemus story was here. This season that we allow ourselves to sort of embrace the complicated nature of our faith. The fact that we do have parts of ourselves that we are still wrestling with. The parts of ourselves that are not made visible to everybody. And in this story, of course, night plays a conspicuous role. Nicodemus comes to Jesus by way of night. My earliest memories of night, when I look back, are of nightmares. Those dreams and those thoughts that I didn't want to have. And so it's interesting then that Nicodemus comes by night, approaches Jesus, this rabbi, and asks some questions. Was Nicodemus just hiding in darkness? Was he embarrassed? Was he scared and didn't want to be caught or seen with Jesus? Others say that Nicodemus wasn't really a true believer and that his faith was shallow and superficial, so therefore only come by way of night. Others have said, listen, just a busy leader of a huge religious movement. He didn't have any other time in his busy schedule to come to Jesus other than to come at night. Others have suggested that that was the time when rabbis met, sort of tete-a-tete, sort of a meeting of the mind to discuss theology. But I don't believe that any of those things are the reason why Nicodemus in the story at this point comes to Jesus by way of night. I think night is a character in the Gospel of John. I think night is an important role in the whole work. In fact, frequently in the Gospel of John, the narrator, the author, notes that it was night. So John is using night in a particular way. And it's not our usual understanding of the word. John is using it to describe a condition, a certain circumstance. In John's account then, when we go through and we encounter night, Jesus says, work while it is day, because the night is coming when no one can work. Do you guys work at night? Some shift workers do. But most people sleep at night. They don't work. And so night is that time when our usual daytime activities, our usual daytime identities have no meaning. When night comes around, I'm just Steve in his comfies about to go to bed. I'm no longer Pastor Steve. Our regular identities begin to fade into insignificance at night. We no longer work at night. And so at night, we're unable to create and sustain our own life. Elsewhere, Jesus speaks of night as that time when we stumble. Have you ever stubbed your toe or your knee or your shin in the middle of the night getting up to go to the bathroom? And if you haven't, you don't have enough furniture in your house. All of us have done that. And we try not to wake our partner if you live with a partner. And you go, oh, you bite your tongue and you say, ooh. Jesus says the night is the time for those kinds of things where we stumble. We can't see our way forward. Even in our homes where we know where our bathrooms are, sometimes we stub our toes. So night in John's gospel then is separation. It's fragmentation. It's that sense of self that is, I'm one thing at day, in the daytime, and I know who I am, and I know what's going on. And at night, maybe not so much. Maybe that's when doubt creeps in. And we betray ourselves and we betray others. Remember Judas? In John's account, John goes out of his way to mention that what was taking place with the betrayal of Jesus happened at night. John says it right there. He says, as Judas got up from the table and left, John writes, it was night. So night in John's gospel describes those times when they fished all night but caught nothing. At nighttime in John's gospel, our efforts prove fruitless and our nets remain empty. So coming to Jesus then by night was not so much a statement about chronological time. It wasn't a scheduling thing. It wasn't even necessarily a comment on Nicodemus's motive or even the amount of faith that Nicodemus had. Rather, night serves as a reminder of the season in which Nicodemus found himself. A description of Nicodemus's life that probably fits all of us at one point or another. We've all lived a season of night. So coming by night then is the recognition that there is a daytime Nicodemus and a nighttime Nicodemus. Just as there's a daytime Stevan and a nighttime Stevan. A daytime you and a nighttime you. In this Lenten season, we often have an opportunity to be reminded of our nighttime selves. So then by day, Nicodemus knew who he was, right? The story begins by reminding us who Nicodemus was, a leader of the Jews and of the Pharisees. He has an identity. He has a role and a reputation as a leader. He knows and applies the laws to himself and to the people. And people listen to him and follow him. He has a particular place in society. He fits in. He has security and power. By night, however, Nicodemus is lost and confused. He cannot see or understand. Nothing makes sense. He's in the dark, as we say. His work, accomplishments, reputation, and place in society no longer provide the stability or the answers. Everything has changed when night falls. He's stumbling in the dark. All the certainty that Nicodemus has about his life and answers to religious questions and answers to ways has given way to nighttime questions. Jesus engages Nicodemus. He is a willful partner in this conversation and begins down this road of spiritual depth. And all that Nicodemus can muster is saying, how can these things be? By day he keeps faith. By night, however, his net comes up empty. He's looking for something that his daytime life just cannot give him. We all probably know what that's like, don't we? When during the day we're full of confidence and we get home at night and we think, who was that person today? Or who is this person tonight? By day, all is well. We live with that meaning. We live with that direction. But at night, everything is hidden. We stumble, grasping for something to hold, seeking for answers and explanations for the meaning of life. Yet everything has been turned upside down and nothing is certain. In the dark life, nothing makes sense and we don't understand. Nighttime is that time of vulnerability, questions, and wrestling with life. We're almost better to live at daytime than nighttime. We have been taught to live daytime lives. That's what our world values, encourages, and rewards. We want to be daytime people. And that means we spend our life looking for information and answers that work in the daytime. We don't spend our time looking for things that make nighttime living more meaningful. And so we build our reputations and we desire recognition and approval, and we want to establish ourselves when everybody can see. And so we buy stuff and we gain wealth, and we want predictability and control, and we prefer what is safe and familiar. Daytime life, then, is the life we create for ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, come on, the truth is we're awake more than we're asleep. And it appears, certainly now, that daytime it seems to be getting longer and more ubiquitous. And it seems like that's all we need and all we need to do. That's all that's necessary, is just to have a good daytime life. And yet we're stuck always having to create and to recreate our lives. And we never get enough. We never quite get there, do we? It seems that that which we want the most is never quite available to us. There's never quite enough information, never quite enough answers, never quite enough certainty. No matter how hard we try, how much we gather, or how much we know, something will always be missing from our daytime life. It will always be less than the life God intends or desires for us. So Jesus talks about the darkest season of life, the womb. None of us can go back to the womb, can we? But my guess is the womb is a pretty dark place. We're alive. Let me tell you, one of the greatest joys of my life was listening in on my young children coming to life, their hearts and their kicks and their punches within a womb. Their eyes still sealed shut. No light, and yet life is there, meaning is there. And so Jesus at night references the darkest season of life, that of the womb. Jesus says to Nicodemus, listen, unless you're born again, you cannot see the kingdom. No one can enter the kingdom of God without being born again. No matter how full, beautiful, or successful our daytime life is, it will always be incomplete, fragile, and fleeting. How could it not be? It's the life we have created for ourselves, and what is born of flesh is flesh. All of us have seen our daytime lives shift and crumble in the fragility of daytime life. And if you haven't been there, good on you. My identity in my life is completely gone many times. And so we realize that about ourselves and about our life, that we must at times enter the nighttime life. And that's the irony, isn't it, of this whole story. Nicodemus has it all certain, and Jesus references the darkest womb-like experience, and he can't pull it together. He doesn't understand it. Most of us do whatever we can to avoid the darkness. Nighttime living isn't much fun. It's difficult, uncomfortable, even painful. It's not our first choice. For many of us, we'd rather live our lives out of the darkness. We turn on our nightlight. How many of you still use a nightlight? Thank you, Ken, for your honesty. Sleep doctors tell us that you should shut off your nightlights. In fact, sleep doctors tell us that we should make our rooms the darkest places that we can. The darker the night, the better the sleep. And so while we are born of flesh, there is more to life than just what we create for ourselves. And this season of Lent then focuses us on the other side of living. The letting go instead of the possessing, the hunger instead of fullness, the self-denial instead of self-satisfaction, change instead of status quo, self-examination instead of blissful ignorance, and darkness rather than light. The great temptation in the nighttime is to think that if we just get the answer, if we can just understand and explain it all, then we'll know what to do. We'll do it better in the daytime. We'll do it differently this time. Things will change and we'll get what we want. That's what Nicodemus is doing. How can these things be? He pronounces to Jesus. He wants an answer. He wants information. He wants just more daytime living. And sadly, that doesn't work in the night. He wants a nightlight, and Jesus doesn't offer it. He says, you must go back to the womb. The nighttime of life is a situation not to be resolved, not a problem to be figured out or a question to be answered. As difficult and as painful as it may be, the nighttime of life is the womb by which we are born from above. The discomforts of darkness are the contractions by which we are pushed into a new life. We're born again. Not in the evangelical sense of the word, as much as that may have meaning. But this nighttime birth changes everything about our daytime life. That second birth gives meaning, completes, and fulfills our first birth. And here's the thing. Nighttime life and the birth that comes from the womb is never your own doing. Juliana didn't bring herself into this world. In our nighttime selves, that existence that we want, those answers that we want, is not something that we can do. It's the work of the Spirit. And so Jesus says, listen, Nicodemus, you don't get it. The Spirit blows wherever the Spirit wants to blow. And if you're ever going to make it through the night, back into the day, as one who has gone through the womb a second time, you must allow the Spirit to work. This is not your work, Nicodemus. We cannot birth ourselves. We can only feel and give way to the rhythm of the contractions. So don't flee the darkness, Jesus says. Don't fight the night. Let yourself be born again. The contractions of the darkness are God reshaping, reforming, and remolding us into the likeness of Christ. Because isn't that really what we want? Isn't that why we've shown up here today? Isn't that what this holy season of Lent is all about? Lent is our reminder that the nighttime of life, no matter how dark, is always filled with the promise of new life, full life, abundant life, God's own life, the eternal life. So why settle for recreating ourselves one more time when Christ is dying to give us a life that we could never create ourselves?